If you want to deny evolution, that's fine. But don't make your kids do it, because we need them,
And that's where the problem comes in. Okay? If you want to believe in the Big Bang, just enjoy yourself, but keep your religion at home. The Russian atheist astronomer came to America and spoke at one of the universities, and he started off his speech, he said, folks, either there is a God or there isn't. Both possibilities are frightening. If there is no God, we're in trouble. We're hurtling through space around the sun right now at 66,000 miles an hour, and nobody's in charge. That's a scary thought. But if God made the world, He owns it. That means He makes the rules. You see, if there is a God, we better find out who He is, and find out what He wants, and do what He says. Malcolm Muggeridge said, I am convinced the theory of evolution, especially the extent to which it's been applied, will be one of the great jokes in the history books of the future. It's a joke. And it would be a joke if it weren't for the tragic results. How many kids are taught this thing every day and believe it, and it destroys their faith?
This documentary will be about the lie of evolution, or evolution, as some pronounce it. This documentary will be about the lie of evolution. This is to make people aware of the evil and deception of this theory. If you really believe that we came from nothing out of nowhere, and we are insignificant beings with no purpose, I especially recommend you to watch this documentary, because you have been lied to. If you want to keep fooling yourself by believing that, you can move on now and pretend there is no other explanation of our existence. Or you can take 1 hour to think about something that really matters. Maybe you will learn something new. The following things will be discussed. Problems with the theory of evolution. Evolution lies. The evil roots of evolution. The connection between evolution, the Big Bang, and heliocentrism. I hope you will enjoy this documentary.
People cannot come to terms with evolution, the blind designer, making all the diversity and complexity of life that they prefer to believe was created by God.
You hear this one a lot. Science has proven evolution, therefore evolution is true. Since evolution is true and Christians don't believe it, then Christians don't believe science and they aren't rational people. Really, let's put that claim to the test. First off, evolution in the sense that things change is evident. No rational person disputes that. Therefore, rational Christians believe it. We can observe change, but evolution in the sense that life came from non-life and then that life began to randomly generate new genetic information and over time it eventually produced humans is something entirely different and something that quite honestly doesn't hold up against science. In other words, evolution in the sense of molecules to man is not scientifically plausible and therefore should not be viewed as scientific fact. Quite honestly, it is in great opposition to science, that is, observational science, the kind of science we can test and repeat and use our 5 senses to understand. Science demonstrates that over time, living organisms lose genetic information. They don't gain it. That same science demonstrates that life doesn't arise from non-life. Follow along if you would. Fact 1. There is no known observable process by which new genetic information can be added to an organism's genetic code. None. That pretty much refutes evolution right away because there's no way to go from a fish to an amphibian without adding new information, right? If living organisms cannot produce new genetic information, how can anything gradually change into something of higher intelligence or form or complexity? That is, how can anything evolve from an amoeba to a man without adding new genetic information? The answer, of course, is that it can't. Plain and simple. Now, some have speculated and they have imagined all kinds of things and they brought in artists to produce creative renderings based on guesses, and they have been successful in telling a very convincing story that humans evolved from ape-like creatures. But those are just drawings, people. They're just stories. But what we really observe is humans are humans and apes are apes. Now, if fact 1 buried evolutionary thinking deep into the Precambrian soil, this next fact, fact 2, tosses so much sediment on it that not even the greatest team of paleontologists with the latest subterranean gizmo could dig up the remains. Check this out. Never, again, never has it been observed that life can come from non-life. So here are 2 major scientific evidences against evolution. I reiterate for clarity, life has never been observed to come from non-life, and there is no known, observable process by which new genetic information can be added to the genetic code of an organism.
Once in a while I get people that that claim they don't believe in evolution. And my response generally is, why not? Really, why not?
You guys believe 20 billion years ago there was a Big Bang where nothing exploded and produced everything. 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth cooled down, made a hard rocky crust. It rained on the rocks for millions of years, turned them into soup, and the soup came alive 3 billion years ago. Found somebody to marry, and something to eat, of course, and slowly evolved into everything we see today. There are some lies in our science books. Taught it for 15 years. Even though I'm not teaching it anymore, I still like to study. It's so many neat things to learn. We're going to cover some of that tonight. I'm not against science, I'm not against schools, I'm not against teachers, because most of them don't know what they believe. You have to tell them. One professor was getting kind of upset about this time. He said, Mr. Hovind, there are hundreds of varieties of dogs in the world. He said, do you mean to tell me that you believe all these dogs came from 2 dogs off a Noah's Ark? You expect me to believe that? I said, sir, would you look at what you're teaching your students? You're teaching your students that all the dogs in the world came from a rock.
Charles Darwin was disciplined. I mean, he did these extraordinary experiments, this series of experiments.
Then they're going to tell the kids, well, we have evidence for this theory. Charlie Darwin stopped off at these islands right there called the Galapagos Islands. Charlie studied the birds very carefully and said, you know what? I think all these birds had a common ancestor. I bet you're right, Charlie. It was a bird. You see 14 kinds of birds, and you conclude that birds and bananas are related.
Here are these ancient dinosaur bones or fossils.
They tell the kids they have evidence of evolution from fossils. I don't think so. If you find a fossil in the dirt, all you know is it died. You don't know that it had any kids. And you sure don't know that it had different kids. You bring in a bone to the judge. Judge, I found this bone in the dirt. This is the ancestor of all the humans today. They would laugh at you. You don't know that that's the ancestor of anybody. And why on earth would you think a bone in the dirt can do something animals today cannot do? They'll say, boys and girls, you have 2 bones in your wrist, radius and ulna. And boys and girls, look at the whale's flipper carefully. Did you know the whale has 2 bones in his flipper? And they're called the radius and the ulna? Same as ours. Wow. Who named them, teacher? The whale? Think about it. Even Stephen Gould admitted the absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages is a persistent and nagging problem for evolution. See, what's happened, these guys have looked for missing links in the fossil record. They can't find any, and so they say, well, maybe evolution happened so fast it wasn't preserved. Maybe a reptile laid an egg and a bird hatched out. Well, who did that bird marry?
This process that brought us to be is billions of years old. It happens very fast, billions of years fast. Here is radioactivity.
We're going to tell the kids in the late 1940s they invented carbon dating. We're going to explain a little bit about radiometric dating and how it's supposed to work, and then show you that it does not work, okay? It sounds good, but there are some assumptions that mess everything up. If we had walked into a room and found a candle burning on the table, and I asked you the question, when was it lit? You say, I don't know, Mr. Hovind, it's burning when I got here. Okay, well then let's do some empirical science. Let's measure the height of the candle. Suppose the candle is 7 inches tall. Who can tell me when it was lit? Okay, nobody. Let's do some more empirical science. Let's measure the rate of burn. Suppose we determine it's burning 1 inch an hour. When was it lit? You're going to have a hard time telling me unless you're willing to make some assumptions. You find a fossil in the dirt, you can measure how much C14 is in it. Very accurately, by the way. And you can measure how fast it's decaying. That's just like measuring the height of your candle and how fast it's burning. Now, when did that animal die? You don't have a clue. Here's what you ought to consider about carbon dating. Samples of known age, it doesn't work. If it's a sample of unknown age, it is assumed to work.
It's just really a hard thing. It's really a hard thing. Your world just becomes fantastically complicated when you don't believe in evolution.
Freshly killed seal, carbon dated 1,300 years old. Shells from living snails, carbon dated 27,000 years old. Living penguins, carbon dated 8,000 years old. One part of Dima was 40,000 years old, another part was 26,000, and the wood next to it is 9,000. Then they tell the kids about the geologic column. They say each of the layers is a different age, you know, Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, Archeozoic, all them Zoic boys. Now, if you get a petrified tree standing up, running through different rock layers, I don't think it's smart to say those layers are vastly different ages. Those trees did not get slowly covered by the sediments over millions of years. They would rot and fall down.
Crazy.
They'll say, boys and girls, you have an appendix that you don't need anymore. That's a vestigial structure. That's proof of evolution. Well, excuse me, you do need your appendix. The appendix is part of your immune system. If your appendix is taken out, you can still live, okay, but it increases your susceptibility to quite a few diseases. You could live without both your legs and both your arms and both your eyes also. That doesn't prove you don't need them. There are no vestigial organs, and even if there were, that would be the opposite of evolution. That's losing, not gaining. I was taught when I went to school, man used to have a tail, but he lost it because he didn't need it. I thought, didn't need it? Have you ever thought how handy a tail would be? Have you ever come to the door with 2 sacks of groceries? Wouldn't that be nice, man, be able to grab that door and walk right around and get in it? Lost it because we didn't need it. Man, you could drive the car and tune the radio knob and hold the Coke at the same time.
What we're finding is that natural selection seems to be an incredibly important factor in generating new species.
Natural selection, the key evolutionary mechanism Darwin identified.
The bad designs get eaten by the good ones, and so all you have is good ones.
Why is there still monkeys?
Natural selection doesn't cause any evolution. It makes sure the bad ones don't survive, but it's not going to change it to something else.
That's what evolution is.
If you worked in a factory that produced cars and your job was to check for defects, and you caught every single mistake and you rejected it, how long would it take that process to change the car to an airplane? You say it'll never change it. That's my point.
Nearly every textbook in science magazine teaches that the Earth is billions of years old, and the primary dating method used for determining this is what is called radioisotope dating, or radiometric dating. Now, this is a reliable method for measuring absolute ages of rocks and the age of the Earth, right? First off, many scientists now regard the age of the Earth to be between 4.55 and 4.6 billion years old. Okay. So if this method is reliable and accurate, why the 50 million year discrepancy? That seems like a lot. But let's get into some details here and see what's going on. Keep in mind that there's all kinds of scientific jargon on this topic, and so we'll just present a very straightforward, simplified version of the process. Radiometric dating is the process of estimating the ages of rocks based on the decay of radioactive elements in them. Basically, there are certain kinds of atoms in nature that are unstable and spontaneously decay into other kinds of atoms. For instance, uranium will radioactively decay through a series of steps until it becomes the stable element called lead. The original element is called the parent element, and the end result is called the daughter element. Radioisotope dating is commonly used to date igneous rocks, rocks which formed when hot molten material cooled and solidified. The dating clock started when the rock cooled. During the molten state, it is assumed that the intense heat forced any gaseous daughter elements to escape. It is assumed that once the rock cooled, no more atoms escaped, and any daughter element now found in the rock is a result of radioactive decay since that rock formed. The decay rate is measured in terms of half-life, that is, the length of time it takes half of the remaining atoms of a radioactive parent element to decay. Now, of course, that can be measured in a laboratory, and it is assumed that since we know the decay rate, we can calculate backwards and come up with the age of the rock. But is that all there is to it? Here's where it gets tricky. It's true we can measure a decay rate using observational science, but there's another kind of science that is required to accurately calculate dates for rocks, and that is what we call historical science. Historical science deals with the things in the past, and therefore it cannot be repeated and tested. Dating methods require both types of science, because in order to get accurate rock dates, one would have to accurately know both the decay rate and the initial conditions of the rock sample, right? Since radioisotope dating uses both types of science, we can't directly measure the ages of rocks. There are assumptions involved. For instance, how do we know what the initial conditions were in the rock sample? How do we know the amounts of parent or daughter elements now in that sample haven't been altered by other processes in the past? How does someone know the decay rate has remained constant since the rock formed? The answer is they don't. Let's simplify here and talk about a typical hourglass. Let's say you walk into a room and you see an hourglass with sand at the top and sand at the bottom, and some sand sprinkling from the top chamber to the bottom. Well, observational science would allow us to see and measure the sand, and then calculate how long the hourglass has been running, right? We could make our sand measurements and then calculate when the hourglass was turned over, right? Well, those calculations could be wrong, because we may have failed to consider some major assumptions, like, was there any sand at the bottom when the hourglass was turned over? Has any sand been added or taken out of the hourglass? Has the sand always been falling at a constant rate? Since we did not observe the initial conditions when the hourglass started, and we haven't been watching the sand all the time since then, we must make assumptions. All three of those assumptions can affect our time calculations. Now, of course, there's more to understanding all of this, but enough said.
A very unusual animal is the duck-billed platypus. It lays eggs but suckles its young, has webbed feet, pockets in its jaws to carry food, a soft sensitive bill that can detect the movement of worms under the mud, waterproof fur, a beaver-like tail, and a poisonous spur on its rear legs. Our question to the evolutionist is, what were its ancestors? In fact, in producing his theory of evolution, Darwin told what he knew was a deliberate lie. All species can vary slightly in nature, but not much, as they would generate weaknesses that would result in their elimination. This range can be extended by breeders who can protect extreme but weaker varieties, but even then, breeders are well aware that there are still limits that they cannot breed beyond. Darwin knew this, but still said in his Origin of Species, "It is rash to assert that a limit has been attained in any one case." This opened the floodgates for any amateur biologist to fabricate evolutionary links between species and whole groups which have never existed in nature.
Is 19th century Austrian physicist Ludwig Boltzmann's tombstone. Etched on top is an elegant equation, S equals K log W. It's the mathematical formulation of a powerful concept known as entropy. Entropy is a measure of something that we're all familiar with, disorder or randomness, and it's an important idea because there's a tendency of everything in the universe to move from order to disorder. Here's a way to get a feel for the idea. Take my book, all 569 pages of it. It's very ordered, with the first page followed by the second, followed by the third, and so on. But now, let's tear the pages out and let entropy go to work. As you can see, the pages become very disordered. And the reason is simple. There is only one way for them to land in order, but a huge number of ways for them to land out of order. And so it's much more likely that they'll land in a total mess. And this is what we experience in our daily lives. Things move from order to disorder. In this case, from a neat ordered book to pages that are randomly scattered. Everywhere we look, we see examples of entropy or disorder increasing with the passage of time. An egg breaks and splatters. Ice cubes lose their orderly shape as they melt into water. Billowing smoke becomes increasingly disordered.
Ordered states become disordered states. And that appears to be perhaps the direction of an arrow of time.
We see sort of degrees of messiness, a measure of disorder, tend to increase in one direction of time.
And so that, for Boltzmann, begins to create an arc of time.
So maybe this is the answer. Maybe the arrow of time comes from the tendency of nature to evolve toward ever greater disorder. This sure seems like progress, but there's just one small problem with this reasoning. Because the laws of physics don't distinguish between the future and the past, entropy should increase not only toward the future, but also toward the past. And that makes no sense.
And if you go to a human geneticist today, and ask them, is the human population genetically degenerating today? They will basically universally say yes. Now, they would imagine that if we increased natural selection, we might be able to stop that. But what we're going to be learning today is that is not true. We can rigorously show that natural selection cannot stop the mutation problem. So a very famous geneticist, Dr. Crow, recently said, "We are genetically inferior to caveman." He's a hardcore evolutionist. So human genetic entropy, as we look at our cultural traditions, you'll find that many, perhaps most cultures have traditions of superior men of yore. Well, what does Scripture tell us about this? If we look at the lifespan of the patriarchs after the flood, we can do a very interesting experiment with biblical data. And this is something that students and teachers might consider doing. You just go into the Old Testament and plot the age of the patriarchs, starting with Noah and all his descendants, to see what happens to lifespan over time. This is what it looks like. So the first data point is Shem, and then the descendants of Shem through Abraham, through Moses, through David, and the last dot is Jesus Christ. And what we see is the descendants of Noah display what in biology we would call a biological decay curve. Now, when I was a young Christian and not yet surrendered to the Word of God, I read those chapters and I thought, these are crazy numbers. They must have just made these up. But look at the consistency of the data. If you were a writer of the Bible and wanted to dream up something like this, would you want to show a biological decay curve? No. It's there, and it's a revelation that Scripture has recorded biological degeneration. So, guys, this is kind of us, okay? The letters in our genome are kind of dissolving. They're being scrambled by mutation, and as that happens, our body falls apart. And ladies, I'm afraid you're subject to the same problem. So this is a visual image of what happens to us with time, both as individuals and as the human race. So genetic entropy is everywhere we look. It is painfully obvious. It is the bad news. It speaks not of creation, but of the fall. It is perfectly in keeping with Scripture. It reveals our desperate need for a redeeming Savior. The good news is in the light of the bad news, and that is that we can have salvation through Jesus Christ. Again, just to affirm that Scripture strongly teaches genetic degeneration, let's read Psalm 102. They will perish, but you will endure. Yes, they will all grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will change them, and they will be changed. And in Isaiah, for the heavens will vanish away like smoke, the earth will grow old like a garment, and those who dwell in it will die in like manner, but my salvation will be forever, and my righteousness will not be abolished. All creation is wearing out. Hebrews, you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain, and they will all grow old like a garment. Like a cloak, you will fold them up, and they will be changed.
The religion is beginning to overcome the minds of the young. It goes by the name of evolution.
The students are taught we have evidence from development. Darwin considered this by far the strongest single class of evidence. This textbook says, the human embryo growing in the mother has gills like a fish. Those little folds of skin are not gills. Those little wrinkles under your chin when you're growing up later develop into bones in the ear and glands in the throat. They never have anything to do with breathing. I've seen folks that have 5 or 6 chins and they can't breathe through any of them but the top one. Those are not gill slits. Ernst Haeckel, though, said the turning point in his thinking was when he read Darwin's book. He made huge charts of his posters of his drawings of these embryos and traveled all over Germany and just about by himself converted the Germans to believing in evolution. Haeckel took a drawing of a dog and a human embryo and he changed them to make them look exactly alike. On top are Haeckel's fake drawings. Underneath are actual photographs of what he claimed he was drawing a picture of. Now, either he's a lousy artist or he's a liar. Well, it turns out he's a liar. He was convicted of fraud by his own university, proven to be a fraud. But guess what? Haeckel's fake drawings are still used in textbooks in your state right now. It's only been proven wrong 125 years ago. I know it takes a while to get textbooks up to date, but that ought to be plenty of time. Adolf Hitler said, you let me control the textbooks, I'll control the state. Watch this sentence here carefully. Some kid's doing this for homework tonight. Boys and girls, do you think humans are still evolving? Now, what kind of question is that? Doesn't that question assume that evolution has happened? What if a kid doesn't believe in evolution? How's he supposed to do his homework tonight? That question does not teach him how to think critically. That teaches him what to think, not how to think. And when the kid gets done with this course, he's going to think he knows how to think. But he doesn't. He knows how to be told what to think. Brainwashing at taxpayer expense. They want to use my tax dollars to teach that to your kids in our schools. Was your ancestor an ape-like creature? I don't think so. Let's talk about a few of the so-called cavemen. We could spend hours on this topic, but we got more to cover here. Nebraska man was used for years as evidence for evolution. All they found for Nebraska man was one tooth. That is the entire Nebraska man right there. One tooth. Then they built an entire man from that one tooth and later made him a wife. Now you have to really be good to know what his wife looks like from his tooth. Okay, but these are professionals. Don't question them, okay? They know what they're talking about. Later they found out the tooth actually came from a pig. There's the real Nebraska man right there. How about Piltdown man, named after the gravel pit it was found in Piltdown, England. Somebody took a human skull and an ape's jaw, they filed them down and fooled everybody. In 1912, they discovered the Piltdown man. It was in the New York Times. Darwin theory proved true from the Piltdown man. It was going to be used in 1925 at the Scopes monkey trial as part of the evidence for evolution. But the judge said the question is not, is there evidence for evolution? The question is, did he violate the law of teaching? So he was found guilty of breaking the law. The teacher was John T. Scopes down here in Dayton, Tennessee. But Piltdown man was a hoax. Somebody had taken an ape's jawbone and a human skull, broke the TMJs off, made them fit together, and fooled everybody, filed the teeth down. For 40 years, it was in the textbooks as proof for evolution. It was a fraud, exposed as a fraud. 1953. Neanderthal man is still in your textbooks, used in your town here in Knoxville, Tennessee. But it's been proven years ago it cannot possibly be a missing link. Long story about the Neander Valley, named after Joachim Neander, that wrote the song in the songbook, Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of Creation. Great godly man. Back in 1856, they found a skeleton petrified, a man petrified, in this valley called the Neander Valley, and they named it Neanderthal man. The back was bent over. Well, apes walk on 4 legs and man walks on 2, so when the Darwin's theory became popular, they resurrected the Neanderthal man and said, oh wow, maybe he's slowly evolving, he's coming up. Well, they've known from the very beginning it was an old man with arthritis who's slowly going down. He's not coming up at all. He's headed down. But they still keep him in the textbooks. About 300 Neanderthals have been found. Their brains are bigger than ours. Their bone structure was incredibly strong. They said they had so many muscles that the average Neanderthal could probably pick up the average NFL linebacker and fling him over the goalpost. Phenomenal strength in the Neanderthals. They gave the same skull to 9 different artists and said, what did he look like in life? They got 9 different answers. They said, what would you like him to look like? We're artists, you know. We can make him, you want him ape-like or human-like? You tell us what you want. We'll do it. Jack Cuazzo, a friend of mine from New Jersey, has been a dentist for 32 years. He came and spoke at our conference a few weeks ago at the boot camp we had in Pensacola. He studied the actual Neanderthal skulls in Europe. He said these Neanderthals are just perfectly normal humans that are living to really great age. See, before the flood came, the people lived to be 900. After the flood, lifespans dropped off to 400, and then 200, and then 100. But that's still a long time to live. And it's a simple fact, the bones of your eyebrow ridge never stop growing. So if you could live to be 300 or 400 years old, your eyebrow ridge would stick way out. People today that use their jaws a lot, like the Aborigines in Australia, are always using their jaws as a vice. They don't carry a toolbox with them. Their eyebrow ridge sticks out really far because of the chewing muscles. It pulls on the bone. The Neanderthals are perfectly normal human that are living to be 200 or 300 years old. That's all they are. Their brain's bigger than ours. They're not subhuman at all. They're just really old human. There's an Aborigine on the far left over there. See the eyebrow ridge sticking out? That's from chewing or using your jaw muscles a lot. There are a lot of different shapes of head. You could line up the folks in Knoxville, Tennessee and prove evolution just by the shape of the skull and drive downtown. You'll see what I'm talking about, okay? There's Cro-Magnon man, still used in the textbooks, yet it's perfectly normal human. Why on earth is that considered a missing link? They've got one in there called Homo sapien is modern man. He's listed as Cro-Magnon. It's not modern, it's not a missing link at all. One they've got in there now is called Australopithecus afarensis. That was proven wrong in 1973. 30 years ago, proven wrong. Why are they keeping that in the textbooks as evidence for evolution? They've got Australopithecus africanus, or afarensis, better known as Lucy. How many have ever heard of Lucy before? Donald Johanson found Lucy in 1974, Ethiopia. He had gone there with a grant to look for missing links. Somebody gave him some money, said, here, go find a missing link. If you don't find one, no more money. 2 weeks before his grant money expired, he discovered Lucy. Highly motivated, I suspect. And that would be a suspect, by the way, in a court of law, you know. Lucy was 3 feet tall. It was obviously a chimpanzee of some kind. Now, the bones of the skull were crushed thoroughly. Could not tell anything about the skull. But when they put it together for your kid's textbook, they make it half human, half ape. They named it Lucy because they were listening to the song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Very popular back then, which, by the way, has the initials LSD, which they must have been on when they found this thing. But the knee joint that was labeled Lucy's knee in National Geographic was actually found 1.5 miles away and 200 feet deeper. But National Geographic labeled it Lucy's knee. It's not Lucy's knee. It's 1.5 miles away, for heaven's sake, okay? There's quite a controversy about that knee joint still. But the knee joint is the best evidence they have that Lucy was becoming a human. Because an ape has the lower and upper leg that are in a straight line with each other. A human leg goes up to your knee and angles off to the side because your hips are wider than your knees. Lucy's knee angled off to the side, the femur angled. And Donald said, see, that proves she's becoming a human. No, any monkey that climbs trees has an angled femur. What he found was a tree-climbing monkey. It's not proof it's becoming a human. He said, well, the bones are slightly bigger than a regular ape. Well, that's true. It doesn't prove it's becoming a human. The bones of a Clydesdale are slightly bigger than a regular horse. It doesn't prove it's becoming a truck, for heaven's sake, okay? What he found was a heavy-duty chimpanzee, and probably the pre-flood chimpanzees and everything was probably more heavy-duty. If they're living longer, much healthier, that's all he found. There are big horses and little horses today, by the way. St. Louis Zoo put human feet on their Lucy display. Not one foot bone or hand bone was found. Not one. Every other Australopithecine that's been found has curled toes. Professor Menton at Washington University said, the statue is a complete misrepresentation. That's a big fancy word for lie. I prefer smaller words. It's a lie. The zoo director said, zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under. We cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates, and we think this impression it creates is correct. Bruce, are you telling me you would lie to kids coming through your zoo just to get an impression across to them that evolution is true? You mean your theory is more important than the facts? That's exactly correct. They will lie to the kids going through these science centers and zoos to make them believe this evolution theory.
We've all heard the theory that chimps are close human relatives, but is there any truth to that? Secular scientists claimed in the 1970s that chimp genomes are 98% similar to humans, and it was apparently verified by more modern techniques. But that estimate actually used isolated segments of DNA that we already share with chimps, not the whole genomes. The latest comparison to include all of the DNA between the two species revealed only a 70% identity, a huge difference from what scientists have been claiming for years. And a 70% similarity really isn't surprising. Chimps and humans, and even dogs, cats, horses, and more, share some basic similarities: metabolizing foods, growing hair, breathing air, and drinking water. So of course, much of the genetic material would have to be the same. But chimps don't have the intellectual abilities of humans to create or communicate, or the creative abilities in their hands. For example, they cannot build hospitals, operate on one another, play baseball, or write poetry. So it makes sense that when new research compared each chimp chromosome piece by piece to the corresponding human chromosome pieces, they were 30% different. In fact, 900 million DNA letter differences separate the two species. Far too many precise and vital bits of information for any source other than genius intelligence to generate. Chimps and humans are very different, not only in their anatomy and behavioral traits, but also in their genomes. When the entire genomes of humans and chimps are compared, it becomes clear that they were each engineered uniquely and separately by an omnipotent genius creator.
According to an intriguing article from Creation Ministries International, tracts of footprints found in a quarry in Poland have turned the evolutionary world upside down. For years, there has been a neat evolutionary story, CMI says, about how fish evolved 4 legs and came out of the ocean onto the land. Probably the most famous fossil in this sea-to-land icon of evolution is Tiktaalik rosei, a fish with fins that was claimed to have had features intermediate between fish and tetrapods. Creationists consistently rejected the evolutionary spin put on the fossil and showed that it had nothing to do with the alleged sea-to-land transition. All the same, evolutionists promoted Tiktaalik relentlessly. It has its own website, as well as features in evolutionary diagrams, stars on the covers of books about evolution, and was even the theme of a song to promote evolution. Richard Dawkins, in his latest book, The Greatest Show on Earth, claims Tiktaalik is the perfect missing link. Perfect because it almost exactly splits the difference between fish and amphibian, and perfect because it is missing no longer, Dawkins says. But now this footprint evidence from Poland consigns Tiktaalik and all its companion fossils onto the garbage heap. From being stars of the show, they have suddenly become an evolutionary dead end. So the creationists, as it seems, were right all along. Creation International claims that it has now been demonstrated in a strong case that these supposed evolutionary links were in reality 4-legged animals that resembled large lizards. If 4-legged animals existed 18 million years earlier, then Tiktaalik can't be the transitional fossil it has been claimed to be. Tiktaalik has suddenly been demoted to an evolutionary dead end, along with all the other fossils connected with it. In other words, all those neat evolutionary diagrams that vividly displayed the transition from fish to 4-footed animal ancestor now need to be disposed of. The evolutionary house of cards, so proudly paraded before the world, collapses with a breeze of evidence from Poland. And this is not some small correction, CMI says, or a minor detail. It has turned the evolutionary world upside down. Something of the magnitude of the upset can be gleaned from statements made about the find in Nature magazine. Quote, "This forces a radical reassessment of the timing, ecology, and environmental setting of the fish tetrapod transition, as well as the completeness of the body fossil record." And this quote, "It will cause a significant reappraisal of our understanding of tetrapod origins." Those scientists who have dedicated their lives and careers to the standard fish-to-beast story will not be very enthused by the implications of the latest find. They will be reluctant to change, especially since they have nothing to replace it with, CMI says. Curiously, there are a few different ways they could choose to rework the evidence and hold on to Tiktaalik at the same time. But if that doesn't work, they may simply ignore it. Time will tell. But in the meantime, the fairy tale of the magic mud of evolution continues to unwind and fall apart.
Invading all of education, tricking them to listen to Darwinian fiction. Sorry, Charlie, these tricks are for kids. You can't trick the truth.
Charles Darwin was racist. Charles Darwin came up with this idea that there were lesser human races than others, weaker people. Did he really think that they should not be helped and that they should potentially be sterilized or exterminated? Please listen to the words of Charles Darwin himself.
With savages, the weak in body or mind are soon eliminated, and those that survive commonly exhibit a vigorous state of health. We civilized men, on the other hand, do our utmost to check the process of elimination. We build asylums for the imbecile, the maimed, and the sick. We institute poor laws, and our medical men exert their utmost skill to save the life of everyone to the last moment. There is reason to believe that vaccination has preserved thousands who, from a weak constitution, would formerly have succumbed to smallpox. Thus, the weak members of civilized societies propagate their kind. No one, who has attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. It is surprising how soon a want of care, or care wrongly directed, leads to the degeneration of a domestic race. But excepting in the case of man himself, hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed. Charles Darwin, Descent of Man.
That's the passage Darwinists would rather have you not read, that they pretend doesn't exist in trying to cover up Darwin's own views about how his theory applies to society. And I think most people today would recognize just how outrageous that is. Saying things like, we shouldn't inoculate people against smallpox, or that the fact of inoculating people against smallpox, helping the poor, saving the sick, helping the mentally disabled, is basically destroying the human race. Now, Darwinists will also say, once people have read that passage, they say, oh, well, Darwin goes on to say that sympathy won't allow us to do what reason tells us. Why not? In Darwin's own view, sympathy simply was programmed into us because it promoted survival. In his own view, once something no longer promotes survival, it's no longer moral. So what sort of objection is that? I think Darwin was better than his principles. Darwin himself was sort of squeamish about applying his principles to their logical conclusion, but he laid out the problem. And in fact, that passage you just read was the proof text, and it was cited again and again by eugenists in America and Europe. And in fact, people should know when they think that eugenics was something that Darwin had nothing to do with. Of course, the very term was coined by his cousin Francis Galton. His own sons were then leaders in the eugenics movement. And of course, he wrote this passage, which inspired the eugenics movement and tied in, really, again, a Darwinian justification. In Darwin's view, by helping the poor, saving the sick, inoculating people against smallpox, we are counteracting natural selection, and so we're going to destroy the human race. And so you either have two choices. I mean, you just have two choices. One is go back to the law of the jungle and let people be killed off, or if you want to be the humane Darwinist, you'd reinstitute something like natural selection artificially, and that's eugenics.
Adolf Hitler's historic so-called Negro Project and scientific research to produce good genes, as in eugenics, and getting rid of so-called imbeciles, morons, human weeds, and savages lives on. In keeping with his Darwinian goal of giving the favored races a leg up in their struggle for their preservation of life, his business is booming, buying and selling baby parts for profit and scientific research and who knows what else. Be it known that Joseph Mengele is in the market for eyeballs, vocal cords, brains, and livers. As an added bonus to this medical research, the Negro population will be reduced, and money will be made coming and going. The citizens are forced to finance the organization, providing the merchants of death the ability to sell their products. So it's a mix of forced government participation and private profits. Textbook fascism. Oops, did I say Adolf Hitler and Joseph Mengele? I meant Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood. The proceeding was written by satirist Rob Roseanne.
What do these people have in common? It was a philosophy that took root in the early 1900s, a tragic chapter of American history.
Eugenics was a social movement that presumed to divide the human race between the so-called fit and the so-called unfit. In other words, decide which humans were better than other humans.
It was the attempt to breed better human beings by applying the principles of Darwinian biology to human reproduction.
We're going to eliminate the bad genes by limiting reproduction among those concentrations of the bad gene pool.
In 1883, Sir Francis Galton coined the term eugenics, meaning good in birth. He believed that charitable outreaches only thwarted the proper evolution of the human race, a perspective he shared with his own cousin, Charles Darwin.
He expressed huge fears that we were counteracting the law of natural selection, sort of sinning against natural selection by, as he put it, inoculating people against smallpox, by helping the poor, by helping the sick, by building hospitals, that by doing this we were helping to survive, or helping people to survive who in nature would have been killed off.
Francis Galton was influenced by the theory of evolution. And he believed that because there is natural selection in nature that supposedly improves species, that we could take evolution into our own hands, if you will.
The bottom line was he created a racist theology, a racist science, and a racist sociology that became the basis of such things as National Socialism in Nazi Germany.
We should always be careful in tying the Nazis to anything, but there's no question that the Nazi movement was influenced by the eugenics movement. The Nazi movement did not create the eugenics movement, it was influenced by it. In fact, when the German government under Hitler wanted to create some eugenics laws, they went to California to find how the California legislature had determined to allow sterilization.
They had a whole set of congressional hearings on how, by allowing these people from Poland and Italy and the southern East European countries in, we are degrading the germplasm of the heredity of the nation, and that we couldn't afford to do that on eugenics grounds. And so the Immigration Restriction Act of 1924 was largely justified based on Darwinian biology. In fact, in the late 1930s, when Jews were trying to get out of places like Poland and some of the Eastern European countries, and were turned away by America, they weren't let in, even though our overall immigration quotas weren't being met. And instead, many of them ended up in the gas chambers.
This type of master race philosophy became public policy across the United States. This map from 1935 reflects the states where eugenic sterilization laws were in effect. By 1941, eugenic proponents had lobbied the passage of sterilization policies in 33 states.
In the United States, between 1908 and, say, early 1960s, 60 to 70,000 innocent Americans were involuntarily sterilized based on these pseudoscientific notions of eugenics.
The U.S. practice of sterilizing so-called racially inferior, feeble-minded, or defective individuals was backed by the leading geneticists of that time, who often justified the practice on grounds that it would ease the burden placed upon the public to care for them in the long run.
Leading eugenists like Charles Davenport, Harvard-trained biologist, one of the founders of genetics, a fellow of the National Academy of Sciences, made the point that he thought blacks were differentially favored by natural selection, and so that they were much further back in the evolutionary tree than whites.
He was able to obtain a great deal of financing from groups such as the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. He founded Cold Spring Harbor to do eugenics research and to promote eugenics thinking throughout the country.
Margaret Sanger, who founded the organization later called Planned Parenthood, wrote, "The most successful educational approach to the Negro is through a religious appeal. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population."
One of the key reasons that she favored birth control was not care for women, it was because she thought the wrong people were breeding, blacks, the poor, and that we needed to stop them for eugenics reasons.
She developed in the 1930s and 40s something called the Negro Project, aimed at limiting African American population centers, ultimately marginalizing the undesirables, and brought in a whole host of eugenic laws in states all across the nation.
Elaine Riddick, a Windfall, North Carolina native, was only 13 when she became pregnant.
My grandmother found out that I was pregnant. I couldn't tell no one that this guy was the one that raped me and had gotten me pregnant because he said that he would kill me.
The Eugenics Board of North Carolina determined she was promiscuous and feeble-minded, a perfect target at the time for compulsory sterilization.
The state of North Carolina labeled me feeble-minded. They labeled me illiterate. This is the reason they gave for sterilizing me. The state of North Carolina said that I would never be able to do anything for myself.
Elaine's grandmother, who had been receiving federal aid, was visited several times by a North Carolina social worker. Tony Riddick, the only son Elaine would ever be able to have, shares what his grandmother said to him about that fateful visit.
My grandmother had explained to me early on that the state had approached her, or representatives from the state had approached her, explaining to her that this small operation was going to be something very easy, and they need to do this so that they can continue to give my great-grandmother some of the aid that she was getting, or assistance that she was getting at that time.
Elaine's grandmother, who was illiterate, signed an X, unknowingly granting the Eugenics Board of North Carolina permission to sterilize Elaine, which she later discovered was performed while delivering her son by C-section.
My grandmother told me later on, I guess when I was in my 20s, she didn't know that she had done that to me. She didn't know.
My mother had told me that she was raped by my father, forced into sex by my father, and that was bad enough. It was really heartbreaking. I mean, it tore me apart, tore my mother apart.
I felt like it was my fault. I felt like I did something wrong.
Elaine's sterilization in 1964 has haunted her for decades. She went on to receive a college degree and now has a grandson. In North Carolina alone, as many as 8,000 women were sterilized as a result of eugenic sterilization laws, for which State Representative Larry Womble is attempting to pass a bill seeking compensation for the victims.
This is America. This is supposed to be the land of the free. But it wasn't for me.
We don't want history to repeat itself. So it's extremely important that all Americans, that we not turn a blind eye when we see these things happening.
When we say that some human beings have higher value than other human beings, we implicitly at least say that that means the better human beings, the superior human beings, have the right to exploit the weaker human beings or the less valuable human beings. It is the cause of all of the horrors of human history, the wars, the genocides, and the sterilizations. And we better avoid that. We know better. We have history to teach us.
Now, what were those 3 points again, Roger? The 3 things were, number 1, that they did not want Satan did not want the human family to think that he or his angels existed.
Right.
The second point that you made had to do with taking control of people's minds.
That's right.
The third point was what?
Was to destroy the Bible without burning it.
Okay.
See?
And what was his strategy on that?
On that, it was very interesting. Because after the Great General Council, it was decided that Satan would tutor Charles Darwin personally in setting up the principles of his theories of evolution. He was tutored by Lucifer himself, the fallen Lucifer. And at that time, it was understood, Satan and his spirit counselors understood, that if a person was led to believe in the theory of evolution, it would, in his life, destroy completely the creation week of the Bible, the fall of man, and the plan of redemption. It would do away with it.
In one fell swoop.
Yeah. Now, he made a unique statement. He said that according to the spirits, anyone that teaches a theory of evolution is considered to be a minister of a great religious system. See, they call it the religious system, the theory of evolution, because it is a system of schooling people and getting them to disqualify themselves from being members of Christ's kingdom. And he said that every teacher of that theory is recognized by the spirits as a person of great value and receives a very special unction from Satan himself, giving great power to induce spiritual blindness, to convince and convert. 3 capacities are given to those teachers of the theory.
In the fertile soils of the Middle East, pagan religions prevailed in Mesopotamia. These pagans generated a number of myths and superstitions about the origin of life and the universe. One of these was the belief in evolution. Consequently, they resorted to the myth of evolution, inherited from the Sumerians, to explain how living beings came into existence. Thus, ancient Greece became the junction point of materialist philosophy and the myth of evolution. The pagan Romans later cherished this heritage. These two concepts from idol-worshipping cultures were introduced to the modern world in the 18th century. Some European intellectuals, influenced by ancient Greek sources, who accordingly adopted materialism with one common belief. They were completely against the very idea of monotheistic religion. The book by the renowned materialist Baron de Holbach, The System of Nature, was considered the principal source of atheism. In this context, the French biologist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was the first person to give a detailed account of the theory of evolution. Lamarck's theory, which was later refuted, maintained that living beings evolved from one another through slight variations over time. It was Charles Darwin who repeated and popularized Lamarck's views, albeit in a slightly different form. Darwin revealed his views in England in 1859 through the publication of his book The Origin of the Species. Darwin's book was in reality a detailed version of the evolution myth, originally introduced by the ancient Sumerians.
People claim belief in God, but asked if they believe in evolution, they applaud. That's contradictory, that's called hypocrisy. It's fairy tale time in every university.
The globe and the heliocentric model of the solar system. What a truly amazing accomplishment of man. It took the collective efforts of some of the greatest minds of all time, over 2,000 years, to invent this model. It was a reverse-engineered masterpiece. Every objection to the model always met with just another cleverly disguised reverse-engineered explanation. For example, the lacking stellar parallax was rationalized by the stars being trillions upon trillions of miles away. A bunch of zeros were added to the end of their numbers to explain away what any common sense would refute. What these men did was invent a dual system of astronomy, a second model of the universe that can explain everything we observe. A model built on perfected mathematics that have no actual relevance to the truth. As George Orwell once wrote in his prophetic book, 1984. "What are the stars?" said O'Brien indifferently. "They are bits of fire a few kilometers away. We could reach them if we wanted to, or we could blot them out. The Earth is the center of the universe. The sun and the stars go round it. When we navigate the ocean, or when we predict an eclipse, we often find it convenient to assume that the Earth goes round the sun, and that the stars are millions upon millions of kilometers away. But what of it? Do you suppose it is beyond us to produce a dual system of astronomy? The stars can be near or distant, according as we need them. Do you suppose our mathematicians are unequal to that? Have you forgotten doublethink? These men invented a dual system of astronomy, and these men marveled at their accomplishments. Finally, we shall place the sun himself at the center of the universe. The globe, heliocentrism, the Big Bang Theory, evolution, all pseudoscientific lies taught to us as fact, and we are taught lie after lie after lie. They need to keep us completely ignorant and uninformed, and for the exact same reason that they didn't educate the slaves. An uneducated slave was much easier to control than an educated one. And slavery still exists today. It has just evolved beyond the ball and chain. Instead of forced labor, we are allowed to have the illusion of education, and we are allowed to choose our own profession. This illusion of freedom and this illusion of choice makes us more productive. The more productive we are, the more taxes we can pay. We are all just small cogs in a massive machine. We are their slaves. We are their debt slaves. So like any slave, why would they ever tell us the truth? Knowledge is power, and he who holds the knowledge holds the power. They pretended to give us educations, but all it was a watered-down curriculum designed to prevent your mind from reaching its true potential. All it was government indoctrination, and people gobbled up lie after lie. All these lies serve one master agenda, and that's to remove God from creation. Their answer for a randomly created, godless universe was the Big Bang Theory, which requires spherical-shaped stars and planets formed through gravity to even be plausible. All of Satan's lies blind us from the truth and lead us further away from God. They work hard to try to hide God from us because no one can serve two masters. They want money to be your master. They need you to be a debt slave to their grand monetary Ponzi scheme because it is you, the common worker, that keeps this matrix alive and functioning. If people knew 100% that God is real, that there truly is an afterlife, and that this physical state we are in is only a tiny blip on the radar, they would stop showing up to their dead-end jobs working for slave wages, and they would stop being debt slaves to the bankers who rule over us, and people would choose to serve God instead of money. The entire system would collapse. These carefully manufactured lies all serve one agenda, and that is to hide God, so that we will continue to serve them and their debt-based money system and not God, because no one can serve two masters.
Just one way, the narrow path to the kingdom. It's not religion, it's the truth I believe in.
They want us to believe we came from nothing out of nowhere, for no reason. The globe Earth and the illusion of space has been made to make this in your mind an acceptable idea. They want us to think we came here because of coincidence and that we are insignificant. However, the truth is the opposite with all these things. I believe we did not came from nothing out of nowhere. We are not insignificant and we have a purpose. I hope you see the connection of evolution and the other lies now, and that there are many problems with this evolution religion. You may ask, why does this theory of evolution still exist? The answer is money. Yes, money. Because with money you can control a lot. When scientists find evidence that is against this theory, may shut their eyes because they may lose their job and funding if they speak about it, and they may not have another theory to replace their faith in evolution. So this is why this theory is still taught in every college. If you're truly honest with yourselves and deny Jesus Christ as our only Savior, you cannot use excuses like He is not real and there's no proof, or there is more proof for evolution. It is just because you want to live for yourselves and you want to do whatever you like and not to worry about a higher intelligence judging you. That is the ultimate issue of evolutionists and atheists. But there is a great difference between living free and being made free. It sounds like a lot of fun to do whatever you like, but at the end you will feel empty. The only way to fill your emptiness is by accepting Jesus as your Savior. I hope you will think about this and maybe do some research on the evolution lie. I wish you the best and good luck in researching. Thank you for watching.
Hey, if you died today, where would you go? You ought to think about it because you will be dead for a long time. Doesn't matter how long you live, you're going to be dead longer than that. You know George Washington died 200 years ago and he's still dead. How much longer does he have to go? He's going to be dead for a long time. All you get in this life is a little bitty dash between two dates. Just a little and it's gone. What are you going to do with your dash? Where would you go if you died? Now, if you're not sure you're going to heaven, you ought to give your heart to the Lord and get saved. Say, Lord, you may have it, the whole thing. If you are saved, you ought to find something to do for the Lord. And you ought to quit worrying about getting a fancier car and a fancier house and start worrying about who's going to heaven or hell. Maybe God gave you that good job so you can give some money to missionaries, not so you can build a bigger, fancier house. God loves you. God has a plan for your life. And if you don't want it, well, that's your business. But the devil is laughing at you for believing in that. But God loves you, and He wants you to come to heaven. And if you'd like to find out how to go to heaven, come see me. I'll be glad to show you.
The Big Bang. Before the Big Bang.
If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved.